Estás viendo Canal América, televisión dominicana para el mundo.
A Time for True show is sponsored by the Office of Dr. Bernard Fialkoff, a periodontal, dental implant and laser specialist in New York City, for over 40 years. Dr. Fialkoff was honored by the International College of Dentists and Pierre Fauchard, and received the Presidential Lifetime Humanitarian Honor from the White House. Call us at 718-229-3838.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your fears.
Welcome to a Dine for Truth show. I'm your host, Dr. Bernard Fialkoff. Pleasure to have you back in your special space. We get a chance to relax and get the latest innovations, advances from leaders all across the globe. Many of you have been asking, how do I avail myself of the episodes? Very simple. Go on YouTube, click a Time for Truth show, hit the subscribe button. We'd love to have you as one of our viewers. There's no fee, there's no requirements. Just that you take what you get in the show, you go out and you make a better world. And tonight we have such a man, we have such a guest. A man who's gone through ups and downs all around. He's like a Broadway show live. And I really am very happy that we have him on the segment tonight. We're very lucky to have this man in Buddha. If you will, let's put some pictures up of Reverend Kelly up on the screen as I introduce you to this remarkable man whose life is a powerful story of transformation, of faith, of service. His family really all were reverends and pastors. And Reverend Kelly is the founder and executive director of Open Door Youth Gang Alternatives. It's Denver's oldest anti-gang program, established in '86 to reduce gang recruitment and street violence. He's also a founding member of the Metro Gang Coalition and a senior member of the California Gang Investigators Association. And he's worked with the Colorado Department of Corrections on gang intervention and reentry programs for those people who need to start their lives anew. He was born, as I said, into a family of ministers, and he experienced both the promise and hardship in his early life, including an unfortunate drug-related conviction that led to his imprisonment. But, as life would have it, it was there that he made a profound decision to change direction, devote his life in a different direction, this time to God, and to use his own experience to help other people, to help youth avoid the same destructive path. For nearly 4 decades, Reverend Kelly has been on the front lines of gang intervention, mentoring at-risk youth, mediating between rival gangs, supporting victims and families, working alongside law enforcement, and creating programs that help people successfully return to society. His work has included youth character, education efforts, including the Way to Happiness program, a common sense guide to a better living. That Way to Happiness program is part of his broader mission to give youth practical alternatives to drugs, violence, and gang involvement. His service has earned him major honors including induction into the Blacks in Colorado Hall of Fame, the Denver Bar Association Liberty Bell Award, the El Pomar Award of Excellence, Cusa 9 News 9 Who Cares recognition, and a full and unconditional pardon from Colorado Governor Bill Ritter. Tonight, we'll talk about what he has learned regarding gangs, drugs, violence, redemption, and what it truly takes to reach young people before the streets do. And Buddha, let's bid a warm welcome and bring him up live. Let's greet Reverend Leon Kelly to A Time for Truth show. Welcome, sir.
Hey, man, I'm up here listening to what you were saying, man. I said, okay. Above all of that, I tell folks, I'm just a basic servant. Just a basic servant, man. You know, that's been allowed to be used by God to try to make a difference, man. Now, I'm no different than anybody else that is willing to do what they're called to do. So
well, you know what? You know what? Those words are very profound. Doing what you're called to do, and that's a big one because a lot of us ignore our instincts and our perceptions. That's a whole show that we can have on that, but I want to ask you, because we have so much to cover here, your early life took you from a very religious family through difficult choices. You got incarcerated. Ultimately, you go into a life of service. So the obvious question that really would help the viewers, how did those experiences mold your life, and what did you encounter that made you take a look at life?
Well, Doc, you know, I feel that everybody has a purpose. Everybody has a purpose, and it's for them to achieve their calling and pursue it. See, you know, my grandfather was a minister and pastor in the Deep South. My dad was a minister and pastor from Brookhaven, Mississippi. You know, I saw what they went through as trying to deal with people, you know, and I looked at them, man, and I said, oh, man, you know, and God blessed me with a little bit of talents, you know, with a little bit of handles. And I was always one for the underdog, so to speak, you know, but then when I saw what they were going through, and I said, nah, you know, 2 ministers before me, that's cool, that's good. But then here I am after all these years. And the fact of the matter is that to be willing to accept your calling, you know, because I didn't want it. You know, and after a while, I had come to realize that God was preparing me as he did my grandfather, as he did my father. He was preparing me for the work to be done in this day and time with these kids that I've had an opportunity to be a part of. And I started this actually in 1982. You know, so this is actually my 43rd year of doing what I've been dealing with, and I'm dealing with the offspring of the offspring. And did I want to do it? No. Man, I mean, I'm looking at you, Doc. Man, here we are. Man, right. You come from where you come from. You in people's mouth all the time. Sometimes you got to wire them shut because maybe they talk too much, you know, but that's what you do. That's what you do. Some people don't want to do what you do. Some people don't want to do what I do. But God put us in these positions to do what we do for our purpose, to make this world a better place.
You know what? Exactly. You know, it's why I do the show. People say to me, how you take the time to do this show? I said, the world needs this show. The world needs some truth. And that leads me to the next question I had for you, which is, you founded Open Door Youth Gang Alternatives back in '86, like 40 years ago. Amazing. What did you see happening in your Denver that convinced you that you had to do something?
You know, I was the program director at this rec center over in the hood.
Right.
And anybody who felt like they had any handles, they came and played at my center. You know, because ball was a big thing, you know, and when I got out of school, I played semi-pro ball. played in the pro-am and all of that. And it was something that a lot of my kids from the hood felt like they wanted to do, is play ball, whether football, basketball, type of thing. And so I was looking at my kids that was coming in my center, and I started to know the change of behavior on certain ones. And I'm
Right.
looking at, Mike and Terry and certain ones that I developed a relationship with, and started looking at them claiming a particular set, talking about cuds and blood, I mean, cud. And I said, man, what is this? And then when I started to see how their attitude and the behavior was changing,
Right.
I felt that I had to try to understand what was it being introduced to? What was this? It wasn't enough for them to come in my center and play ball and all that. But then when we took a break and went outside, they started talking about cuz and started throwing up their little gang signs. And I said, okay, again, what is this? And then that's when I started to really look into it. And as I looked into it, when they, started talking to some of them about it, they talking about the relative that they were influenced by from California. Then talking about the Crips, because we're on the east side, and that's where the Crips started in Denver. And so when I got to looking at it, man, then I started, when I say started to see their behavior change in an aggressive way. I felt that, man, okay, I had to find out what this was all about, and so when I would have certain ones come into my center, I would identify certain ones who had the ability to have a little handles, little and control over, the other group. And the way we did games back in the days is that, you call the next game, and then you bring a waiting list. And once your time comes up, I call certain ones to be on my squad. And these were the ones that other little fellas were following. And so we got on the court, man, and we were able to hold our own, so to speak. After the game was over, because after you play 3 games, then you gotta get off and all. And so after we got off, we went out, and then we're just kicking it and we're just talking. They started talking about cuz this, cuz that, and all of that. And then I tried to understand what this was all about. Then as time started to go forward, I started to see the behavior, and it was an aggressive behavior. It was a behavior that was sort of violent, and when they started talking about how they hated red, the Bloods, and the Bloods was up at Park Hill on the other side of the town, and we're all Crips on this side. When I started to see the violence, man, that's when I was telling the police, and even my Mayor Federico Pena, who was the very first Hispanic Latino mayor in the city of Denver. He came to me and was asking me about this, and we got to talking about it. And I said, man, hey, Federico, man, if we don't deal with this now, if we don't address this problem now, it's going to be like a cancer, and we all know how that works. If a body is plagued with cancer, if it's left unattended, certainly it's going to grow and eventually kill the body. And at that time, I was dealing with a city that didn't want to address the issue, didn't want to look at it, because this is Denver, Colorado, man. We the Mile High City. This is where people come from Chicago, Detroit, Washington, LA to get away from their drama, to come to a city with sky-capped mountains. They thought we rode buffaloes and horses here, and so they wanted to come to Colorado, man. And but yet no city wanted to blemish their image with anything like negative, like gangs and drugs coming to this city, man. But it was something that we couldn't put under the rug, And I know the city and the chief were saying, Rev, let's slow down a little bit. Let's take time to evaluate, analyze this, and see if it's really a problem that we're going to really have to address. By the time they continue to evaluate and analyze it, the problem continued to grow. And then we start dealing with our homicides, our drive-by shootings. And at first, the drive-by shootings was more so to intimidate, instead of just to hit a mark. And then after the mark started to get hit, it just went from there, man.
It
So
makes
that
total
was
sense.
the
Well, I'm going to say to you, it makes sense what you're saying. And here you are, you're having these people tell you to wait, to evaluate, to see. When you, in your heart, you knew what was going on. And, you started using this Way to Happiness program. How did that begin? Was that something that just kind of popped up in front of you while it was going on? Or tell us a little bit about that.
well, I tell you. See, first, Doc, I tell folks, first, me, I'm not a Muslim. I'm not a Buddhist. I'm not a Scientologist. I'm not a Hinduism. I'm a Christian. That's who I am. But I
Right.
have and I will and I continue to work with Muslim, Buddhist, Scientologists, anybody that is willing to
Exactly.
help me make this world a better place.
That's right.
See? And so when I was dealing with all this craziness out on the streets, man, I would be getting a call at 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning about drive-by shooting. Somebody got hit, somebody got shot, whatever. And I would be out there almost every day. Something was written and aired about gangs coming to Colorado and all of that, man. And I was out there and I felt like that little dude going around the city putting his thumb in the dike, because it was just spilling out all over the place.
That's
Man.
right.
And I
That's
was
right.
all over there just doing all of that. And I couldn't really get people to really take this for serious, but yet my kids was getting hit and kids were dying. And that's when I started my death list in 1988. It's called my death list, man. And I knew it was going to be a crazy issue if we don't deal with it. So we had what we call on the parade of lights here, and by the almost every day something was written and aired about Reverend Kelly dealing with gangs and all that. The Scientologists, they have their float, and there was a float in the parade, a way of light, and they called and asked if the gang fighter would be able to be willing to ride on their float with them. Now, Doc, I'm out here trying to deal with these gangsters trying to kill each other. Now they want me to ride on the float and be able to do, oh, man. So I did it back then, but then I was running after school program, and within my after school program, I was dealing with a lot of kids, and then some people from the church came over and asked me if they would be willing to volunteer and help me, and all, and I said, okay, this Scientologist and L. Ron Hubbard, because most people from my hood, they were spooked on Scientology. They were spooked on other folk, and so I said, okay, if y'all willing to come over, and want to help me with my after school program, okay. And they came over with that applied scholastic, learning how to learn.
Right.
And yeah, this was way back in the days, so we did that. And so that was the introduction to me working with the church and all of that. And they knew I wasn't a Scientologist, but how was I able to bridge that gap that was between what they believed in and thought about and some of us people over in the hood, the way we thought about certain folks. And so, when we got together, got to introduce them into, what I was doing, man, that was about 10, 15, 20 plus years before I got involved with the way to happiness, and so on down the road, man, I'm bypassing a lot of different things here to get to way to happiness, because for 43 years dealing with Open Door, and then 17 years of me being involved with the way to happiness, and that's why right now, what I'm doing right now is I call it my 11th hour of my career, my life, of merging these two entities, these two efforts together. 43 years of dealing with the streets, 17 years of dealing with the way to happiness, and how I've been able to incorporate both of these into the work that I've been able to do over these last number of years. See, so it's a lot to talk about, a lot to say in 40 plus years, 17 plus years in a short period of time. So I'm trying to highlight, how we were able to converge the two efforts together.
Well,
And
Rev, it makes a lot of sense to me because I got to be upfront, and the viewers should know this too. I'm a Jewish guy. My wife's a Catholic lady. She's from Venezuela, and I'm a surgeon. So what happened? I was in my practice, and I do this drug-free world program that's supported by the Scientology Church, and the program is educational. So the lady comes in. And she comes to me, pulls me aside, the mother of this patient of mine. She goes to me, Dr. Fialkoff, will you please speak to my son about drugs? And then the father came to me. So I did, and I spoke to the kid, and about a few months went by. I didn't know if anything had happened. And we did some work on him, dental work, so I didn't say anything more to him. And the mother came to me, and the father, and they said, thank goodness for that program sponsored, that drug-free world program, like you do the Way to Happiness program. And they said to me, it worked. He decided on his own. He's not smoking marijuana anymore. He stopped. And I was really, really happy. So you know what? I'm on the same page as you. If something works, you got me. If it doesn't, don't talk to me. But
very simple.
I was going to ask you a question because you had so many accomplishments over so many years and so many hurdles you probably had to face and barriers and blocks. What do you feel is an important event or occurrence that you went through that you think the viewer should realize that will occur when you're out there in life, that you're going to have to somehow get by, that it's not going to just be some kind of cakewalk?
Yeah, well, when I say that my grandfather was a minister, my dad was a minister, mom was a missionary, a very religious background, we were very sheltered as a kid growing up. And it wasn't until I was able to leave home and go up to college, away from them, away from that hedge, that I was exposed to the world, the life, the things that I only read about. And back in those days, we didn't have a computer, that we had in our hand, that these kids have today, So when I got introduced to the world and being an athlete, kids or people have a tendency to put you on a pedestal, and that gave me sort of like an edge, to say, oh man. And then now you presented with a lot of different things, and there's a certain image that I felt like I had to portray, in order to be on that pedestal, and so it was the things that I was introduced to that I know that it was contrary to my teaching of my mom and dad, and I never ever wanted to be an embarrassment to them. I never ever wanted to disappoint my mom and dad. I'm a junior. So I'm the firstborn in my family, and I'm always was Reverend Kelly's son, Reverend Kelly's kid. So when I went up there and was introduced to, back in the day, they had what they call the hippies, and I probably over in Cuba, I don't know how many hippies you had over there, long hair coming out the war, with the flower dresses on and big old afros, and everybody was into making love and peace and not war.
That's
right. And so during that early time, I was introduced to that, man. But then the things that you were introduced to, the drugs, the life, the partying, all of that. Again, I didn't want my mother and my father to know what I was being introduced to, man, but it was different. It was different. And so one thing led to another, and to another. And after everything has been said and done that I was introduced to, I have to look back on it and say that when I was sitting in my prison cell, I had to say that it was God's way of preparing me for the work I was being prepared for. See, because after I was able to repent and talk to my mom and dad about what happened, because they never wanted to accept the fact that this was their son. Because, man, you know, as we talk about, let me show you the way to happiness over there on my cover book. You know, people may see this. You know, I don't know if they can see that.
Oh yeah,
You know, you
if
look
you,
at
if you
that.
hold, yeah, right. If you hold it right there, yeah, hold it up again. That beautiful.
Yeah. And they look at this. How can I get this in front? Yeah.
That's good. That's good
They
right
look at
there.
this book, and I passed thousands of these books, thousands out. And they look at this picture. Now, Doc, you look at this book and see somebody like this. What would first come to your mind? Either
That's a
he have to
real.
be a minister.
That's a real. No, you know
Either
what
he
comes
have
to
to be
mind? That's a real guy.
well. Either he have to be a minister or a pimp. A minister or a pimp on in, man. You know. And I go,
Amen.
well, yeah, I'm a minister. I wasn't a pimp, but the world that I was a part of back then, I lived in the penthouse downtown. And we had clubs like the Sid Kings, the Fall Lake Tipsy Tiger. These were all topless dancing place back in the
Right.
days.
Right.
And my girls that I had morals, you know, and I had you know, the certain morals and values. I did not allow them to sell their body, use that term. But yet our hustle was the girl, the cocaine. And you know, that was our hustle. And so they would go and do what they did and all that. But that out of all of what I was exposed to, I still had morals and values, so to speak,
Right.
because of where I came from, man. And so living at the penthouse, and I would look over the city of Denver from my balcony, and I have to ask the question that, man, there had to be something more to life than what I was doing. It had to be something more to life. And so for a brief moment, I thought that way. And then after a moment, here goes the phone. Phone start ringing again. You know, and they say, hey, Big Kel, can we do this? Can we do that, you know, this stuff. And so it was that whole life. And that's another whole chapter of my life. And if we have time to come back later, there's a number of different chapters in my life here.
I
And
see
so
that.
I'm
I
just
see
sort
that.
of sad of fast forwarding this because everybody want to know, how did you do it? How did you do it? How did you do it? And so the thing with using the way to happiness, there's 21 precepts in that. And see, being a minister, you know, I would go around, I passed out thousands of Bibles, thousands of Bibles, thousands of Bibles. And there's some certain places I couldn't pass out Bibles. You know, I couldn't go to my schools, pass them out. I couldn't go to certain facilities and pass them out. You know, and even though they may ask me, but unfortunately, I couldn't pass them out.
Exactly.
So I needed something that wasn't religious, wasn't a doctrine, wasn't something that had a moral compass, something that I could use and use the principles in any application that I'm dealing with. See, and so this was something I was introduced to. And I don't know if you know my people, Steve and Peggy Fabos.
Yes,
I
absolutely.
don't know.
Good
Yeah,
people.
they my they my people, man.
Great
You
people.
know, and
Yeah.
they, you know, came back years ago and asked if I would be interested in passing out a way to happiness, this and that and all. Man, I told them, okay, let me think about it, because it took me 2 years before I made the decision to put my face on this book. 2 years. I had to understand and study the principles, the all the different precepts, and I had to understand. But then, when anything you see with L. Ron Hubbard on it, automatically, you know, it is a stop point to some people. You know, and I had to, you know, I had to explain to them what I had to go through to understand. And I tell you what, Doc, if I was insecure in my faith, in my belief, you know, I would be spooked like a lot of other folks. You know, that's a spook. That's a spook, you know. Man,
Exactly.
you know, but I tell people, for me, I'm not a Muslim. You know, you know, certain things in the Quran I could use. I'm not a Buddhist. Certain things in there, you know, I could use. You know, so I'm not a Scientologist, but there's certain things I could use. And when I go around and give out thousands of these Way to Happiness books, they look and say, Rev, I didn't know you was a Scientologist. I'm not. I'm not. But the fact of the matter is, if you want to talk to me about these 21 precepts that Dr. Hubbard put together, we could have all kinds of conversation. But if you want to talk about a Scientologist, I'm not a Scientologist. You go talk to a Scientologist and they'll tell you about Scientology. But if you want to talk about these 21 precepts, I got you. I got you. And these are those precepts that have been used.
Well, Rev, you know what? I'm going to tell you, unfortunately, because we had such a great time here, all the time is gone. We're a little bit over, actually. Oh, we're gonna have to have another show. You come back?
But Doc, we only been on here 10 minutes, man.
It seems like 5 minutes, but it's been a half an hour. But I got to tell you, what I love that I want to end on here, what you were saying. It doesn't matter what kind of shirt we're wearing. It doesn't matter whether we wear a hat or not, a man or a woman, or a dress. What matters is we're human beings. We got kids, we got grandkids, we got friends who have kids, and I wholeheartedly with you. And you know that this program, that's why I like that Way to Happiness like you, is it works, it's simple, it's non-religious. But you know what? We definitely got to have another show. So you'll come back?
Hey, man, just let me know. And I work. Because, see, I pick and choose where I go and what I do and who I holler with.
Well, I appreciate you. And I got an idea about this basketball and this Globetrotter friend of mine that I know, and something that I was thinking about. But you know what? Unfortunately, we got to end the show. Reverend Kelly, thank you so much.
All right. Much love, baby. I would encourage anybody to get the book of precepts and look through the precepts, so when we talk again, they'll have an idea of the value of that way to happiness.
Absolutely. In fact, you know what? How about if we just say next Monday we continue with part 2?
Oh, man. Hey, now that we only have more than 15 minutes, we could do this.
Okay, so I'll see you next Monday. For those of you watching, check it out. The Way to Happiness. Thank you, Reverend Kelly. Have a good night.
God bless.
This show was sponsored by A Time for Truth Foundation Incorporated as a community service.
Sometimes life can be so damn hard. You don't know where to go. Everything keeps falling apart. Yeah. You try to do your best, but only God knows that you've given everything you've got, but the world takes you down. You just keep moving on. Let your feet